we have one of our Indiaspora members, Shefali Mehta. She's the founder and principal of Open Rivers Consulting, and Gopal Patel, who's the director of Bhumi Global. And we'll put more information about the two of them because they're doing some incredible things, actually hosting and collaborating with young Indians and the diaspora in a very different way than others. So Shefali and Gopal, welcome.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you. Well, Gopal, I'll give it to you to kick it off.
Well, that's a tough act to follow. Gitanjali was amazing. And we have to continue the thread of conversation of representing the youth. And so I think both of us are going to do our best to do that, Shefali. But it's a real pleasure to be with you this evening, Shefali, and with the Indiaspora community. Shall I start off by explaining what COP26 is? Shall we start with that for our fireside chat? Yeah. Yep. So we're here talking about climate change, and there's a big moment happening towards the end of the year in Glasgow in the first 2 weeks of November called COP26, called the Conference of Parties 26. And it's going to be a moment where the whole world is going to be looking to see how we can increase ambition and action on climate change. Heads of state will be there, Prime Minister Modi, President Biden, private sector, civil society, literally the whole world will be in Glasgow for those 2 weeks. And I'm hoping to be there, Shefali, I think you may be there as well, and hopefully others as well. But the reason this moment, COP26 in Glasgow in November, is important is we have to go back to 2015 and the 2015 Paris Climate Accords. And people may have heard of the Paris Agreement and may not know what it is. But essentially in Paris in 2015, when the agreements were signed, two key things were part of those agreements. And that makes Glasgow really important. The first thing is that every country has to submit voluntary contributions for how they're going to reduce their carbon emissions, called their nationally determined contributions, the NDCs. So in 2015, every country said, this is how we're going to reduce our carbon emissions. And then the other thing in the Paris Climate Accord is that every 5 years, those commitments are reviewed and renewed, right? So last year we had the pandemic, so everything was on hold. So this is a 5-year review. So now is the time when countries are stepping up ambition in really, really significant ways to see how they can push the needle on climate change. You're going to see announcements, I think, coming out this week from the Biden administration. The British government recently have put out some stuff as well. So that's what COP26 is. It's a really, really important moment. And for the diaspora, it's important, I think, because as Emma has been saying, we have so much leadership here in the US, but also so many connections in India as well. And the US and India are the two of the leading countries globally that we can really push the needle in significant ways when it comes to climate change. So that's what climate change is. That's what COP26 is. That's why it's important. Shefali, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I think that's it in a nutshell. And I think for a lot of folks who are joining, I would hope at this point that everyone who's here recognizes the urgency of climate change. I think we have made some pretty significant grounds, whether we wanted to or not, especially I think during COVID, when a lot of these things aligned. And I think beyond the moral and ethical imperative to address it, we have these other angles. And as the title shows, prospering in a net zero economy, what does that mean? So let's take a slightly different angle, because I think so many of us are used to thinking about it from the issues lens, from the moral and ethics. We think of it as philanthropy. Let's think about what proposing a net zero economy mean, and let's consider the opportunity that's actually presented to us here. So I'm going to talk about agriculture because that's really where I live and think, and it's a pretty unique industry. So it's one of the few where basically up to 100% of our outcomes are out of our hands. It's at the behest of nature and the environment. And it's pretty unique if you think about if you're in other industries where you can do the best work and it's going to be, and it can still end up all for naught. And so from a societal, political, and business perspective, ensuring the stability and consistency in our agricultural supply chains means reducing this environmental variability to ensure that we have food security. And it's not just about mitigation. And I think earlier today, we had such an insightful discussion from the India perspective. And I think we really touched on the breadth and the nuances that come with it. We also got to, it's not just about compliance, right? We're seeing a shift across the board. And so when I think about it from how do I reduce environmental variability and food security, really think of it from like the food risk perspective. So humanity's hunger will never cease, right? We have 7.8 billion mouths to feed and growing incredibly fast, right? At rates we haven't seen. So businesses, governments, nonprofits, and others who are actively addressing climate change are making this a part of their strategy, a part of their operations, and part of their organizational culture. These are the organizations that are going to win. So if we're thinking of it from prospering, and that doesn't just mean economic prospering. That means that they're broadly prospering. So they are finding untapped revenue sources, they're creating new technologies and markets, but they're developing resilience, not just for their products, they're developing organizational resilience. So we've seen a lot of nonprofits really struggle through the pandemic. The ones who came through were looking at it from this multifaceted perspective. And so one of the reasons that people don't often think about, but I definitely see in a lot of our work, is one of the best ways to attract, retain, and nurture talent that is coming forth is from our younger generations is by walking the walking, doing the work. Younger generations care about what you do in terms of climate and how you do it. So showing you're committed. Now, we were hoping to spend more time on ag, which is a short talk that you and I have. So I'm just brushing the surface of ag and climate. We have a breakout session later today, so I can dive into soil, carbon capture, and how agriculture is actually an amazing tool for this, and also Indian smallholders and that discussion. But right now, I'd really like to focus on food. So the other side of the ag and food value chain. And I'd really like to talk about something I learned recently and I'm excited to support, because it may not be immediately obvious, but upon reflection, the power of faith and spirituality and its focus on food really shapes us as a human species. So, Gopal, I'd love for you to share more about the work you do in this unique effort and how it affects us all.
Sure, yeah, great. And I love the fact we're talking about food. As Indians, we love food, so it's like, if there's one thing we can all agree on is good food, right? And that's why we're doing this work. So my organization, Bhumi Global, we're a faith-based organization. We work primarily with Hindu groups. We also do work with other religious organizations and traditions. And we formed a coalition at the United Nations called the Faith and Food Coalition. And we're working with Muslim groups and Buddhist groups and Christian groups and the Parliament of the World Religions and Karena Gore from the Center for Earth Ethics to, as you said, look at our food systems from a values, beliefs, ethics, spiritual lens. Because if you look at our food systems, as you're saying, they are wholly unjust and unfair. Prices are inflated artificially. There is mass hunger and poverty. There is excess. There is waste. 30% of all food produced globally ends up in the landfill. So there is immense inefficiencies and unjust in our food systems. And if you look at the world's faith traditions, in many ways, their food systems were always nature positive. They were always good for the earth. I'll just give you one example. In the Jewish tradition, they have a tradition where every 7 years, you do not grow any food. You leave the land just to rest. Just as in the weekly lives of Jewish people on a Saturday do not do any work, every 7 years, they leave the land to itself. So you have this in all of religious and spiritual traditions. But what's happened is those understandings have been supplanted by modern understandings of what food is and the value of food. And so we're going to be having these conversations at the United Nations later this year in relation to the Food System Summit convened by the Secretary General to see how can we bring in a values, beliefs, ethics lens to our food systems to see how we can renew them to meet the challenges, not just now, but as you're saying, in the future, as we have to feed so many more people. It's so important. So that's part of the work. That's part of the work we're doing with faiths, but we're also doing a lot of work with youth. And we just had Gitanjali talking about that, and you and I are carrying that baton very high and very strong here. I'd love for you to hear about your perspective on how we can engage more younger people in this work.
Absolutely. And I want to just echo the importance of spirituality and how we connect is often overlooked. And I thought of how, after speaking with you, my spirituality stems from my Jainism. And I don't think I would do this work if it wasn't for that, but we don't think of it and how core it is, just like food is our spirituality. So youth is so key for many reasons. And I mentioned earlier about how if you really want to think about resilience and building your organization and being successful, they have to be key and core to talent and building a pipeline, kind of irrespective of what sector you're in. But there are other reasons why our youth really matter. And we need our youth now, not just in our future. And I think that is kind of this, hopefully a shift in the paradigm. So it's now, right? This is our youth are needed. So we did just hear Gitanjali speak. Yes, we were the two who get to follow that amazing performance, and I was blown away. I'm sure you were. And what's interesting is she's not just incredible for her age, she's insightful and thoughtful for any age, right? And I think that she showed it in her answers and the work she's doing and the breadth. So I want more folks like her and her peers finding solutions, identifying creative avenues, and pushing us to do more. In our Indian culture, we have a strong veneration and respect for our age and our elders. I think those are beautiful elements of our culture. However, they should not stand in the way of recognizing, enabling, and inviting the innovation and wisdom that our youth hold. We just saw that. We all got to experience that just in the beginning of this event. So we don't have answers to these problems. The older generations are generations. We need all the help we can get, which means our youth have to have a seat at the table at the minimum. And personally, I've put my money where my mouth is. I absolutely believe we can benefit from the environment, live in an equitable and diverse society, and create economic prosperity. I founded and run Open Rivers based on these principles. And in the last 18 months alone, we have served 22 different private, nonprofit, and academic organizations who are fully committed to this belief and put their investment, both money and talent, behind that. They're also paying clients. So this is not about philanthropy. It's not about nonprofit, which is important. There are enormous other reasons for doing this. So underscoring all of this work is that we see our youth as partners. They innovate with us, they learn from us, and we learn from them. So that's what we need to continue doing. So in keeping up with youth, as we look at our diaspora and what excites us, as we're wrapping up kind of what excites us next, is I will say I've been very excited to be a patron member of the Indiaspora since 2017, and I'm impressed by the ubiquity of our diaspora and the desires to engage on these factors. We're going to hear about a new platform right after us that's going to directly talk about this. But before we wrap up, Gopal, I'd love to hear what are your thoughts about what excites you about the diaspora as you look out.
Yeah, sure. And I'm glad that Sanjeev has joined us as being part of the youth group here. So thanks, Sanjeev,
Yes,
for
thank
joining
you.
us here. It's a cool club.
A bit overage, but never mind.
I think what I'm most excited about is just the fact that we're having this conversation, that the diaspora is seeing the immense importance of climate change and the power the diaspora has to really move things really significantly. As I said earlier, America and India are two of the most important countries when it comes to international climate policy and climate negotiations. And so if we can leverage the resources, the power, the impact that we have in both of these countries and in other countries globally as well, we can really see significant movement. And so that's what I'm really, really excited about, is the potential and the fact that we're starting here with having this conversation today, the week that President Biden is hosting his climate summit. So yeah, looking forward to good times ahead.